Ngozi walked as if the ground should be grateful for her steps. She wasn't just beautiful, she was breathtaking. Her skin was the color of polished mahogany, smooth and radiant, as if the sun shone just for her. Her long legs carried her with the confidence of someone who owned the earth. She was always dressed in the finest clothes, bright Ankara wrappers paired with gold necklaces and earrings that jingled with every movement. But her beauty was rivaled only by her arrogance. Ngozi was married to Obinna, a wealthy businessman who lived abroad. He sent her enough money to live comfortably, but instead, she chose to live in extravagant luxury. Her house was the grandest in the neighborhood, with towering gates that made it feel like a fortress. Servants rushed to obey her every command, trembling whenever she raised her voice. Even her husband's family only visited when absolutely necessary. "That woman thinks she's a queen," Obina's sister often said, clicking her tongue in disapproval. But Ngozi didn't care. She had no time for people she considered beneath her, whether it was her house help, market women, or even strangers. To her, money and beauty were power, and she wielded them over everyone. One day, Ngozi decided to visit the market, not because she needed to shop, she had plenty of servants for that, but simply to show off. Dressed in a wrapper that shimmered like the morning sun and heels that clicked loudly with every step, she strode into the market. Traders paused to stare, some in admiration, others whispering about her pride. As she walked past the yam section, an old man carrying a sack of yams accidentally bumped into her. He was frail, his clothes patched and worn. He looked up at her with trembling hands. "I'm sorry, madam," he said, his voice as gentle as the Hamatan breeze. Ngozi hissed loudly. "Sorry for yourself. Can't you see where you're going? Are you blind, or has poverty blocked your eyes?" The old man lowered his head, clutching his sack of yams tightly. "I meant no harm, my daughter," he murmured. Ngozi threw her head back and laughed, sharp, mocking. "Your daughter? Don't insult me. Look at yourself. You don't even deserve to walk where I walk." The old man slowly straightened and looked into her eyes. For a moment, the market fell silent. Though his voice was soft, his words carried a weight that made Ngozi's stomach tighter. "Be careful with your words, my daughter. Pride comes before a fall." "Fall?" Ngozi scoffed. "Look at you, then look at me. If anyone is falling, it's you." She shoved past him, her chin raised high. The old man stood still, watching her walk away. His gaze was calm, but his words were heavy. "The lessons you refuse to learn in peace will come to you through suffering," he said quietly, before vanishing into the crowd. Ngozi didn't hear him. She was too busy strutting away, her pride shining as brightly as the sun. That night, Ngozi's grand home was as silent as a graveyard. The servants had retired to their quarters, and the only sound was the distant hum of crickets outside her window. Wrapped in the softness of silk sheets, Ngozi lay in her massive bed, feeling completely at peace. But as the clock struck midnight, something changed. The air in the room grew heavy, thick enough to choke. Ngozi stirred in her sleep, her brows furrowing. Then she felt it, a weight on the bed, as though someone had joined her. Her eyes flew open, but the room was empty. She turned on the bedside lamp and scanned the space. Nothing. Shrugging it off, she switched off the lights and tried to sleep again, but this time it was worse. She felt hands, strong, firm, and unrelenting, touching her. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her body was frozen. It was as if someone was lying on top of her. Yet when she opened her eyes, no one was there. The ordeal felt like it lasted for hours. When it finally stopped, Ngozi was drenched in sweat, trembling uncontrollably. Her heart pounded and tears of fear filled her eyes. She lit every lamp in the room, but the light brought no comfort. The next night, it happened again, and the night after that. Each time, it was the same, an invisible presence, a torment she could neither explain nor escape. Ngozi clutched the stale piece of bread in her trembling hands. swallowing the lump in her throat. Hunger clawed at her stomach, but the shame weighed heavier than the emptiness inside her. The once proud woman who had strutted through the market in fine wrappers and gold now sat in rags, her swollen belly an object of ridicule. She no longer recognized herself. Her skin, once smooth and radiant, was now dry and patchy. Her long, graceful legs, which once carried her with confidence, had become weak and unsteady. The whispers followed her wherever she went, cruel, mocking. She used to act like she was better than everyone. Now look at her. Pride truly does come before a fall. Maybe she angered the spirits. No normal woman swells like that without being pregnant. Ngozi tried to ignore them, but the words cut deep. Each day was a struggle. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. Obina had cast her out, and his family had made sure she could never return. Her own relatives had long abandoned her, tired of her arrogance and dismissive ways. The servants who once feared her now only pitied her from a distance. At night, the torment continued. The invisible presence still came, pressing down on her, suffocating her. The hands she could not see still touched her, holding her captive in her own body. She screamed, but no one came to help. One night, as she lay on the cold ground near an abandoned shed, she heard a familiar voice, a voice that sent shivers down her spine. The lessons you refuse to learn in peace will come to you through suffering. Ngozi's breath caught in her throat. She turned her head sharply, searching the darkness. There, standing a few feet away, was the old man from the market. He looked exactly the same as he had that day, frail yet strong, his eyes filled with something deeper than pity. Please, Ngozi whispered, dragging herself to her knees. Help me. I don't know what's happening to me. The old man studied her for a long moment before sighing. You mocked me, humiliated me, and treated others as if they were beneath you. You thought beauty and wealth made you untouchable. He shook his head. But pride is a heavy burden to carry, my daughter, and now you carry yours. Ngozi felt tears slip down her face. She had never begged before, never thought she would have to. But now she was nothing. Please, she choked out. Tell me what to do. How do I make this stop? The old man nodded slowly. You must seek forgiveness, not just from me, but from all those you have wronged. Until your heart is humbled, your suffering will not end. Ngozi's lips trembled. The thought of facing those she had scorned, of asking for their mercy, made her stomach twist. But as she looked down at her swollen belly, at the ruin of the woman she once was, she knew she had no choice. For the first time in her life, Ngozi bowed her head in true humility. The road ahead would not be easy, but if there was even a chance she could be free from this curse, she would take it. And so the once proud Ngozi set out on a path she had never walked before, the path of redemption. One day, a group of worshippers passing by saw Ngozi lying on the ground. The leader of the group, the pastor, turned to them and said, "We must save this woman from her sins." The congregation gathered around Ngozi, their voices rising in fervent prayer. Some clapped their hands, others raised their arms to the heavens, calling on God to break whatever unseen chains bound her. The pastor placed his hands gently on her head, his voice steady yet powerful. Lord, this woman has suffered. If she has sinned, let her repentance be heard. If she has been cursed, let your mercy break it, set her free. Ngozi knelt on the cold floor, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in years, she felt something stir within her, something beyond pain, beyond fear. It was a warmth, a flicker of hope in the darkness that had consumed her. Then, as the prayers intensified, something happened. A sharp pain tore through her stomach, so fierce that she let out a scream. The congregation gasped, stepping back as Ngozi clutched her swollen belly. It twisted and contorted, moving unnaturally beneath her hands. "It's leaving her!" someone shouted. Ngozi felt as if something was being ripped from inside her, something heavy and suffocating. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her body shaking violently. Then Just as suddenly as it had begun, the pain stopped. Silence filled the church. Ngozi collapsed onto the floor, panting. When she opened her eyes, she looked down at herself. Her stomach, once grotesquely swollen, was now flat. The burden she had carried for 2 long years had vanished. The congregation erupted in praise. Some wept, others danced, rejoicing in the miracle that had just taken place. But Ngozi lay still, her mind reeling. She had suffered for so long, endured so much shame and torment. Could it really be over? The pastor knelt beside her, his hand still on her shoulder. "You have been freed, my daughter," he said gently. "But now the real journey begins." Ngozi looked up at him, confusion clouding her tired eyes. "You must make things right," he continued. "Forgiveness is not just about being freed from suffering. It is about facing those you have wronged. You must humble yourself before those you once looked down on." The words sent a chill through Ngozi's spine. She had expected relief, not another task. But deep down, she knew the pastor was right. But she had been given a second chance. Now she had to prove she was worthy of it. The next morning, for the first time in years, Ngozi stood before the market women she had once scorned. Her head was no longer held high in arrogance, but bowed in humility. She took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was wrong. I have wronged many of you. I see that now, and I ask for your forgiveness." The women stared at her in shock. Some folded their arms, unwilling to forget the way she had once treated them. Others whispered among themselves, uncertain. Then from the back of the crowd, an old voice spoke. "It is not enough to ask for forgiveness, my daughter. You must show that you have changed." Ngozi turned, her breath catching in her throat. The old man from the market, he stood there watching her with the same calm eyes that had once warned her of her downfall. She swallowed hard, realizing that her journey was far from over. She had been freed from the curse, but true redemption would take much more. And so, Ngozi took her first real step toward rebuilding the life she had lost. From that day forward, Ngozi dedicated her life to serving others. No longer did she wear the finest clothes to show off her beauty. Instead, she dressed modestly and carried herself with quiet dignity. She used the wealth she had left to help the needy, feeding hungry children, providing shelter for the homeless, and offering a kind word to those who had once feared her cruelty. The same market where she had once strutted in arrogance became the place where she now found true purpose. She swept the stalls, helped traders carry their goods, and listened to the struggles of those she once ignored. At first, people were skeptical. Could someone as proud as Ngozi truly change? But as time passed, they saw the sincerity in her actions. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ngozi sat outside the church, her hands folded in quiet reflection. The old man approached once more, his steps slow but steady. "You have done well, my daughter," he said, his voice as calm and wise as ever. Ngozi stood and bowed deeply before him. "I will never forget your words," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Pride comes before a fall, but humility lifts us again." The old man smiled and nodded. "Then your lesson is complete. May you always walk in wisdom." With that, he turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving Ngozi with a heart lighter than it had ever been. From then on, whenever people spoke of her story, it was not to mock her downfall, but to praise her transformation. Moral lesson: pride may lift you high, but it is humility that keeps you standing. True greatness is found not in how high we rise, but in how well we treat those around us. The end. If you enjoyed listening to the story, please like and subscribe to Niger Trends TV. Bye for now.